All right, well, welcome. I am John Handley, and I want to welcome you to the Stephen F. Austin State University's Cole Art Center. And I'm here today with David Lewis, who's Professor of Art History at SFA, and Peter Selz, who is this year's Texas National Juror. Dr. Selz is also the curator of the exhibition Patrick Graham, 30 Years, The Silence Becomes the Painting, which is the show that we have here. Peter Selz is considered one of the best art historians and curators in the United States. He attended Columbia University and later the University of Chicago, where he received his master's degree in 1949 and his doctoral degree in 1954. His dissertation on German expression, written under Joshua Taylor, was the first full-fledged study of the movement. After serving as the chair of the art department and director of the art gallery of Pomona College, Selz became chief curator of painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art from 1958 to 1965. At MoMA, his exhibitions included new images of man, as well as important exhibitions on Rothko, Rodin, and Giacometti. He was then recruited as the founding director of the University Art Museum at UC Berkeley in 1965, where he also served as professor of art history until 1988. During these years, he was appointed to the Advisory Council of the Archives of American Art in 1971. Selz was awarded the Order of Merit from the Federal Republic of Germany in 1967 for his study of German Expressionism. Together with his mentor Joshua Taylor and his colleague Herschel Chipp, they co-edited Theories of Modern Art, the first collected essays on American primary source theories of modern art in 1968. He has lectured worldwide, including as Zach's professor, Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1976, and as visiting professor at the University of New York in 1987. Since 1988, he has been emeritus at UC Berkeley, and since 1993, he has served on the Acquisitions Committee for the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. He won the Charles Rufus Morey Award from the College Art Association in 2006 for the best art history book, and that was The Art of Engagement in 2006. I can say on a personal note, Peter has been my professor, he has been my mentor, he served on my doctoral committee, and I've had the great pleasure of co-teaching a class with him on postmodernism and have worked with him curating some shows in San Francisco. Would you please help me in welcoming Peter Selz? Go ahead and...
All right. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
And thank you, Peter, for taking the time to share with us.
Thank you.
It's the gorgeous exhibition in Texas Nationals, perhaps the strongest one we've had in many, many years. It's exciting. I think for our audience here, it would be interesting to know a little bit about your experience while a curator at MoMA, and maybe you could tell us some stories of interesting events that might have taken place while you were there.
Well, the events were really what I did primarily was organize exhibitions. And that was my job. I was head of that department and for 7.5 years. And it was actually a marvelous thing to be able to do that. At that point, the Guggenheim and the Whitney were not very much in the public eye. And the Metropolitan had hardly done anything in contemporary art. So the Museum of Art was really the place, and that was wonderful to be there. I'll give you a few ideas, a few shows I did. The first one that John just mentioned was called New Images of Man. I did in the late 58, or 59 rather. And at the time when abstract expression was the only thing that people really were looking at. And I realized that worldwide there was also a major figurative paintings were being done. And it was an international show. I had Giacometti in the show, in Dubuffet from France. I had Francis Bacon from England, and from et cetera, from America. This key figure was de Kooning with a series of women, but all the late work of Jackson Pollock became figurative. We don't know what he would have done if he had continued living. And then a number of people that New Yorkers didn't like from the hinterland, several from Chicago, including Leon Golub and Cliff Westerman, 3 from California, including Enrico Lebrun and Nathan Olvera and Richard Ebenkorn. It was a marvelous show to show that the figure was still alive. Right after that, I did the abstract expressionist show, did a wonderful Mark Rothko retrospective, and I'm very happy to say that tomorrow I'll be able to go to Rothko Chapel in Houston for the 2nd time, which is one of the great experiences you can have, etc. And then I did many other shows. I did a show of Italian Futurism. I did 2 retrospectives of German painters, first Emil Nolde, and after that Max Beckmann, etc. There are many, you mentioned the Rodin show, etc.
Yeah.
So that was the main, that was what I did at the moment.
That's a lot for 7
There were a few more. Yeah.
So to follow up on that, could you tell us a little bit more about particular artists that you interacted with, and maybe some of the surprises that you got when you got to know them, things that surprised you about them?
I don't know about surprises, but I got to know artists, and they all became very, very close friends. The first artist I was really close to when I was still in Chicago was Leon Golub, and
by the way, Leon Golub was the first juror of Texas National here in 1995.
He did figurative painting. I mean, nobody else of consequence really did, of his generation. And we became good friends when I worked on the Dubuffet show in Paris a few years later. I stayed with the Golubs, who were living in Paris at the time. And this continued on. Surprises was after he became really well known, it sort of simmered down. I couldn't do much. I had always showed him at MoMA, and it simmered down. So this happens sometimes. And I became friends with Mark Rothko, and this was a great privilege to get to know him and work with him and remain friends. And of course, I was terribly shocked when he committed suicide a good many years later. And Nathan Olvera, a San Francisco painter who was totally unknown when I put him in the Images of Man show. They were these big guys, and we remained very, very good friends. Years later, I wrote a book about him, a monograph, and an exhibition with 26 or 7 different museums in this country. And it's been, and earlier, Piero and I were talking about Peter Volkers. We became good friends. I showed his work at Museum of Modern Art early on. It's huge ceramic pieces, and the New York critics didn't know what to do with that at all. They didn't put it down, they didn't put it up, they didn't know what to do with it. And then in those days, there was a Biennale in Paris of young artists, and I put him in that show, and he received the Prix Rodin for the best sculpture in the show. So it's been pretty good.
In your Peter's biography came out last year, and in there, Peter, you recount a funny story about, well, it's not really that funny, but a story about Peggy Guggenheim. I thought you might like to retell that here.
Yeah, I'll tell that story. Because that was, it was, I guess, the summer of '58. I'm not quite sure it was '58, but I think it was '58. And I was in Venice for the Biennale, and Peggy Guggenheim, I had known Peggy Guggenheim slightly, and she really didn't know what to do with her collection, which was there in this palazzo in Venice. So I said, well, what you could do with your collection, I'm going to be go up to Berkeley now to be a professor of art there and have a new museum. They're building a new museum there. We cannot have your, the Italian government wouldn't let work go out as over, not for permanent. They were over 50 years old. They said, well, we can leave it. You can leave it all here in your palazzo, and we can borrow things sometime. We can have it has become a study center for modern art with the Biennale there, the great library in Venice, and we can just give it to us, and then we can go back and forth. And as long as you're alive, you'll be curator of your collection. And she was rather interested in that idea, and then. Then we were in correspondence. A few months later, one of my colleagues, a man of great distinction actually, went to visit her, and they got along very well. And then finally she said, well, I like what you suggested, I like your colleague, but I really don't know very much about this university way out on the West Coast. I'd like to meet your boss. So I asked Clark Kerr, who was president of the university, whether he would like to come and to see Peggy and make sure we get this collection. So Clark Kerr and I went to Venice, and we had a very, very nice dinner. And Clark Kerr said, well, at different times he was asked, under Kennedy, I think he was asked to be Secretary of Labor, and under Johnson, he was asked to be Secretary of the Interior, I think. Peggy said, well, how come you didn't take these positions? He said, well, important as they are, being the president of the University of California, of all its campuses, is even more important. And he was a very impressive man. And when I took Peggy back to her palazzo that night, and she said, I'm interested. And the next day, I visited her again, and she said, I'm going to talk to my councils. And I think I like the idea very, very much. And so I thought, we had it in the bag. I was already happy that I was going to spend half my time in Berkeley and half my time in Venice. So what could be better? And then a few months later, Ronald Reagan was elected governor of California, and he said he did what he said he would do. He was going to fire Clark Kerr because Kerr was too liberal. And that was one of the first things that Mr. Reagan did. And so that, of course, appeared in the newspapers in Europe. Peggy Guggenheim saw that, and he said, if this is the kind of a place you work for, forget about it. So that was one of the nice things that Mr. Reagan did, among many other horrible things that he owed to our former president. Of course, he was not as bad as now, but still.
So there went your summer home. Well, thank you for that, Peter. So let's shift the conversation now and talk about the Graham Show here. I think what I'd like to do is read a quote to kick off the conversation. You quote in your essay in the catalog, which, by the way, the Graham catalog is available for sale at a special price tonight of $27, including cash, including tax. Yes, and please pay with cash. But you quote Donald Cuspit when he was writing about Graham, and you write that Cuspit said, pure or beautiful painting is all too spiritless and sterile to be adequate to the task of conveying the mourning and melancholy that is modernity's spiritual legacy. Painting must once again become a kind of lament.
Well, I think this is very true. I think, if you think about 20th century painting, the beauty really pretty much went out, which is in some way regrettable. But for the major artists of the 20th century, you cannot think of a Cubist painting being considered really beautiful, although, when you look at it very carefully, you see how beautiful it is. But it's hardly in the traditional sense of beauty. And the same thing was true with German Expressionist paintings. Well, for instance, one important thing in this connection is when Patrick Graham, who was a man of great, great talent, one time saw a show of Emil Nolde that came to Ireland. He was so stunned that he couldn't work for a while. And then he changed what he did. He no longer did the beautiful paintings he evidently did. I haven't seen any of them prior to that, which came very easy to him, and evidently was very, very fine. But then he reversed himself and eventually did the kind of paintings that these great paintings that he did later on. So, if you think what happened in the 20th century, the wars that we've gone through, and then the new images of man was very much done after Nagasaki and Hiroshima and Auschwitz. And all these experiences that the world went through, you really couldn't make beautiful paintings anymore. And art became more and more, the best art that is, a thing that you had to contemplate, that did not come easy. And I never thought that pop art was very interesting because it was just too easy. I mean, you have somebody as famous as Roy Lichtenstein just takes a comic strip and enlarges it and makes all the bending dots of the print. And that's very nice to look at. But that hardly is the kind of thing that you want to contemplate that might change your mind, change your personality, change who you are, which I think what great art does, whether it's literature, music, or painting.
Very good. In looking around at the Patrick Grahams on the wall, I can see there is a kind of beauty here that's an unconventional beauty. And it does seem to deal with the human experience in a powerful way, rather like Rico Lebrun, who talked about his drawing style become too easy, too facile.
Yeah.
And he deliberately stepped outside his prior experience. I mean, to what extent do you think that's maybe still a necessary thing today for artists?
I think it's absolutely necessary. And Patrick, I mean, the best artists doing this today, whether it's Anselm Kiefer or such a magnificent artist, or Patrick Graham, I think do something far beyond that. I took some notes here about some of the pictures. And I want to start with the one over here called Dark and Fatal Heroes.
The one in the corner?
Yeah, which you see here. And you see a self-portrait, and you see many self-portraits in the drawings too. And many self-portraits, not evident, but many self-portraits of the artist. And here he's praising a child.
It's over here.
Oh, it's over here. Yeah. That's it. Probably his son, helpless, just really a bright red face, which presents a vivid contrast to the dark ground. And then there's a luminous golden light. A halo embraces the head of the father and the child. And halos and things from religion appear in one way or another very, very often in Graham's work. And on the left panel of the diptych, there's a mysterious veiled figure that you see here, referring to, it says Tin Drum, referring to Günter Grass's famous novel of the post-war period in Germany. And then the contemporary heroes, Love is Colder Than Dust. You can make out. Many of these pictures have things written. He's part of the Irish tradition. It's words. I mean, Ireland, for all these many years, there was this great literature, but not very much great painting. It's really, there were a few good painters in the 19th century, but mostly Irish painting prior to that. So imitates what was going on the continent of Europe. But Graham indeed also embodies errors and senators. Errors can be seen in one of the beautiful watercolors that you see way back here, that red Odalisque. It's called Sigmar Odalisque. Probably again a self-portrait in there. You see with a beautiful torso of this pink nude reclining above, like in the the list here is all along. And like many of his drawings and paintings and collages, he has pasted paper that the artist left for us. Then there are a few other things I want to talk about. Now, we get to this one here, called Love, or well, you will notice the central figure of a woman connecting these two panels of the diptych, his arms stretched out in the position of the crucifixion, with a large image right to the right of a vagina embedded on the rocks on the left. Love Orwell that you see here is a lake in County Westmeath, where Graham was born and where he lived most of his time. And this is also a place where blackbirds were thriving. In the early 90s, he produced a whole series. We have many of them here. This wonderful blackbird series, several in this show. And like many of this work, they take a long time to look and to decipher and to see what he means and how they affect you. And then one of his masterpieces here, that's one Captain's Hill. And there he collaged the tag writing Love Orwell on here. He has pietà, dove. Again, the religious undertones. And he has many things. You see all these airplanes coming down, dropping bombs on the land. And underneath you see all these crucifixes for the dead. There's the Star of David also is seen floating around in this black thing. We have hills and probably the sea and the sky, maybe not. And then he said, that's one, the Captain's Hill. And then there's a antenna sticking up there, and these lines go right across. And it's one of these paintings that the longer you look at, the more you will experience. And just to finish up on this, Graham has written, part of my attempt is to hear and to receive from silence. It's an attempt to rediscover innocent mystery. And my effort to make art is to redeem this lostness, and therefore, in some way, to redeem myself. So because of that, we call this exhibition Silence Becomes Painting. And silence is very, very important in contemporary art too. Right now there's a show in Berkeley which came from Texas, from the Demille Museum, called Silence. And they have paintings like these mysterious paintings of silence by de Chirico and going on to Rauschenberg's white canvases, white on white, and then many more paintings really dealing with silence, which is so important. In his fine essay on this catalog, Jared Ernest inserts a moving poem by Rilke called Parting Promise, which said, "O shooting star that fell into my eyes and through my body, not to forget you, to endure." And I think silence is very, very important in much contemporary art. And just think of Montan Cage made great compositions of silence. And so this is, silence is important, and this is what we need to do in a way to experience these paintings.
We see a little bit about the way these are done. For example, when we look at the large painting here, you may not be able to see this in the back, but part of the structure, the canvas, is cut out like a window, and then it folds down as though we're looking underneath it. That there's a painting underneath the painting underneath the painting. And these are real feathers attached to the surface, which doesn't come out very well in the catalog, in the reproductions in the book. And one of the things that I really love about Graham's work is sort of tying things together, that we have the airplanes and the crosses, the crucifixions, and then the crucifixions become airplanes. vertical.
Yeah.
The shapes are really sort of the same thing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of
It's
that.
kind of, there's a beautiful kind of
What
poetry.
about little animals in there? Little
Yeah.
sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ireland, yeah, sheep's all over. You go to Ireland, you see all the sheep everywhere.
Well, and also something very interesting on this is that there are all of these little inscriptions which read like prayers that you would find at the Wailing Wall, or even retablos, or so, you know, for a good harvest.
Yeah.
Something about for the family, for a debt owed. So it's almost like in the midst of all of this turmoil and the layer upon layer of meaning are also these utterances of prayer and hope.
There's a wonderful on the far left here, called The Family, I think, a self-portrait.
Yeah.
And that's what you see, how he saw himself. And next to him, in that cell there, is his son Robin, when he was a little boy. Well, some 20 years later, little boy, when we opened the show in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and Patrick Graham wasn't really able to travel so far. But he sent Robin over
sent
here.
Robin.
He looked very different 25 years later. He talked for a while, but the Irish brogue was so difficult for people to understand that most people didn't know what he was saying.
A couple other thoughts about this show. In your essay, you mentioned artists like Sean Keating or Jack Yeats, and these were early 20th century Irish artists who were addressing a sort of politicalness in their
Yeah.
art. Do you think Graham is?
Oh yes, I think there's very definitely. I think both religion and politics are very, very much in there. These earlier painters, they in Ireland, some of them sort of, as I said, looked at very much on the continent, but they were very much aware of being the first British colony and rebelled against that. And Graham is very, very much part of that. There's no question that the political aspect, especially the feeling for Ireland as against England, as against the empire, that it's very, very much in everything that he, in much of the things that he does. And so, for many artists, the politics are very much part of their work, because that's how we live.
You wrote a whole book on that.
I wrote a book on
The Art of Engagement.
Yeah.
I was struck by the comparison that you make with Anselm Kiefer, and in your essay you wrote, both artists found mysterious beauty in dark places and created their own visual responses to the tragedy of existence. Both searched into history and at one time turned to Jerusalem for their theme.
But Graham has a painting here about Jerusalem. I couldn't quite figure out why it's called Jerusalem. But on the other hand, Jerusalem is, historically, in every religion, at least in three, it's such a major idea, a major part of history, a major part of religion. And so I think that's part of it, the history of, the history of the West is so embedded in the idea of what happened over the millennia in Jerusalem. And I think the religious overtones are very much there.
And always something that's somewhere else.
Yeah.
Somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he's certainly drawing. He uses, like for example, the diptych, which is a traditional religious, certainly in Christianity. And really, it's so easy to mistake this for a Madonna and child, but it's not, it is and it isn't. It's really a father and child done in a diptych.
Yeah. Or the crucifix.
Yes,
Yes,
so the crucifixion.
So you see that a great deal of it.
Wreath out in the hallway. He has written, and you'll see these little sketches over here, the word ruah, which is the Hebrew word for breath and spirit. and you see
I
these
see.
biblical references, Ezekiel and different things appearing all through his work, as if he's really mourning some sort of Catholicism or lost Catholicism is what I think too.
And in a way, you know, this is, people, I think most of the art that we really value has a spiritual quality. You know, but this is the brand, or, you know, or the art of the past, you know, which is religious in one way or another. And certainly the art of a person, somebody like Kiefer. I mean, that heavy spiritual quality, you know, dealing with the human spirit rather than beauty.
Do you have anything else?
I'm interested in the way text enters these pictures, that there are bits and pieces of text that are legible, and then maybe some that aren't.
Yeah, that's right. So you have to try and decipher them. But text, you know, I remember years ago I was in Ireland, and, you know, you go into just sit in a bar, and, you know, the person next to you, they all started talking in a way like it's like choice in a way. It has this wonderful, you know, they talk, and the language is so vivid somehow. I never, maybe in Italy it's in a different way, but yeah, there's tremendous vividness of language in Ireland, I think. So, and so he does that. Any more about biographical that you want to talk about? Me?
What would you like to tell us?
I'd like for you to tell them about Louise Nevelson.
Yes.
Well, Louise, now she was a marvelous sculptor. She was really a superb sculptor. And in forget now the year, 62, I think, I was one of the commissioners for the American Pavilion for the Biennale in Venice. And we had a beautiful room of the black assemblages by Louise Nevelson. And Louise Nevelson was sure she was getting the Great Sculpture Prize in Venice. And I told her before, this is not possible because Giacometti is showing in the Swiss Pavilion, and he's going to get the Sculpture Prize. She wouldn't believe me. And, then later on, I'm going to announce the prizes for the show downstairs. And when the prizes were announced, of course, everybody, you know, Giacometti got the Sculpture Prize, and the old lady started crying. So yeah, lots of good stories.
As we all would. Yes.
Why don't we take some questions from the audience?
Yes.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Of course, good.
Go ahead.
Or you want to?
I'm really interested to know how you met up with these artists. How did you get to know them before they were famous? To choose them for your exhibitions.
Okay, well, the Pete Volkers I got to know because I was teaching at Pomona College, and he was throwing pots, and I saw it, and then he was involved with what's going on at Scripps College, and I got to know him, and I saw his work, and I just began to thought it was very, very good work. Later on with Oliveira, I saw a show in a gallery, and I was putting an Images of Man show together, and I said, well, here's a younger artist, and he's working very much along the ideas that I had in this show. So, you know, you get to see an artist, usually you find them in galleries. I found most of the artists in galleries, sometimes in studio visits, but most of the time, you know, you find them in galleries or through friends. And I still find good artists. I found one right now named Israel Feltzat, whom we're going to show at Meridian, and then the show will go to New York and to Miami. And I saw his work just by accident in a small, unimportant gallery in San Francisco, and I was just stunned by the work this guy is doing. And then I found out more about him, and I said, this is somebody I really, really want to show. So, you know, it comes and goes.
So show your work, I think.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah. It's not so easy to get gallery shows.
how did you end up at the Museum of Modern Art?
All right. I know myself. I was astounded when I got the job. Well, I was teaching at Pomona College, and I was head of the department there. And we had a new building. I raised a little money, and we got a new gallery building. And for the opening show, I decided to do a show which I called the Stiglitz Circle, because of that. And you know, I had people like Handley and John Marin and O'Keefe and others in that show. And in order to get it was a lone show. In order to put that show together, I went to New York to talk to Alfred Barr, who was director of the Museum of Modern Art collection, and I talked to him about that. And he was very much impressed with the fact that at a time, it was an abstract expression, was so much the thing coming forward, the thing that everybody was doing, that I was interested in these early American modernists that had been put aside at that time. And most of my, and he was interested in that. Well, the other thing was my PhD dissertation on German Expressionism had just been published as a book and had extremely good reviews, the best reviews I ever got from anything I've written. And so people knew about that. He was impressed, I think, by the fact that I had been teaching both in an art school, because my first teaching job was in Chicago at the Institute of Design at the new Bauhaus, at an art school, and then at the Liberal Arts College, two very different kinds of institutions. And I think the fact that my doctorate from the University of Chicago didn't hurt. So, well, we were talking about the person who had the show before, head of the chief curator of Painting and Sculpture Exhibition, Andrew Ritchie. He just left to become the director of the Yale University Museum. They were looking, they had the person who was second in command there, they didn't think was good enough, I know that. And so he said, how would you like this job? I mean, I was truly astounded.
Another question from the audience.
Peter,
Yeah.
can you address a little bit of the Picasso influences in that Bomberg painting? I keep looking at it.
Well, what you have there is the post-Cubist thing by Picasso, the work from the 1920s, when he goes back to a more figurative kind of Cubism after more abstract Cubism. I think that is very, very much in evidence there. And it was interesting that he had the name Bomberg there. Now, Bomberg was a very, very important teacher, a very good artist, a very good painter. And especially important as a teacher, I think, at the Royal College of Art. And he never really made it big in London, partly because he was a Jew. And I think that is one reason why Patrick Graham is, there could be one reason, because when people like Kitai and Auerbach and the next generation of the School of London, they constantly talked about Bomberg. And I don't think it's one of his greatest paintings, and compared, let's say, to this, or to this one here. It's a good painting.
How are we doing on time? Does anybody know what time is it?
We got more time.
We got about 10 more minutes.
5:45.
Another question from the audience?
What do you want to know? I know everything.
Well,
Yeah.
how would you describe contemporary art, or just art in America today compared to like the iconic 60s when we think about what went on?
Well, I think okay, that's a very, very good question. But we no longer have, I mean, there's no de Kooning around. There's no Roscoe around. We don't have, great masters in American art at this point. We don't have a major movement at this point. We no longer have an art center. I mean, New York used to be the art center like Paris was before. Now there is no art center. Everything has become global. Everything is spread out. And what's happening now in American in art in general, I mean, I'm glad people are still making paintings, and but there's so much going on. There's conceptual art is very, very much coming back. Photography and all kinds of technical things, or different kinds of photographic processes, and so many different art forms. Are prevalent now. So there's it's no longer there's painting. Painting, I think, is still to me what I would like the best. But there's so much going on, so many different kind of art forms, and so many different ways of doing things. And there's a lot of electronic art coming in, a great deal of digital art, and we don't see and video, and there's just and performance art, and there's just so many different things. There's so many different channels. So for a young artist today, it must be very, very difficult to decide which way to go. It wasn't like in the '60s where in centuries before, if you want to be an artist, you became a painter or a sculptor. But now, it's this widespread thing. And again, there's no art center to go to. So it's become very disparate and very, very global. And there's something constantly very good art being done. Yes?
I mean, you started me thinking when you talked about Bombard, and he never really came into his own as an artist, but had a large impact on other artists. Other people talked about him. I think of people like George Orr, who fairly inconspicuous potter in his lifetime,
Yeah.
but considered now one of the fathers of abstract expressionism. Who are some of the artists in your perception that really never came into their own, that have had some of the more profound effects on those who came after?
Maybe just talk about Rico Lebrun, who was a great American artist. And I'm very glad we talked about Lebrun. And there's he had an exhibition here of Rico Lebrun. But he's not, most people never heard of him. And, so people go under very, very, very easily. There are many, many artists, who become neglected and so on, and who should be known better. And I think museum curators should show their work. But instead, museums keep showing. Most museums keep showing the same thing all the time. And for example, he mentioned I'm on the acquisitions committee of the Fine Arts Museums in San Francisco, and people say, well, we really don't have a Roy Lichtenstein. We should try and find the money to buy a Roy Lichtenstein. But people don't come to San Francisco to see Lichtenstein because they can Lichtenstein paintings everywhere else. Instead of looking at home, there's some very, very, very good artists whose work can be acquired for 1/100th the amount, and they don't do this. The public wants to see another Lichtenstein, which is ridiculous.
Or it's really the curators think the public
Yeah.
wants the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's safe to give,
Yeah, that's
the show that succeeded last year is likely to succeed again. And I think there's a lot of pressure in the museum world, as there is in other industries, and that's what it's become.
Yes.
An industry
Very much so.
to increase the bottom line. And it's a self-perpetuating thing, unfortunately.
And people are impressed by the values, the monetary values, not the spiritual values.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of someone like, Gustav Klimt, who I always admired, but I remember when I was an undergraduate, my university professor put him out as an example of bad art. But now his
Where was
paintings, we won't go there. Undergraduate. But now when you see a price tag of 117 million, I bet those same people are looking again at the art, but not for the same reason.
You know, I wrote about Klimt way back when I did my German Expressionist book. You know, I thought he was an interesting artist. So the last, basically a very decorative artist.
Yeah, it's
But he made some very, very good drawings. But, he made some very beautiful decorative works of art. But then in the Neue Gallery in New York, I happened to be a member of the board of that museum. So, but nevertheless, I didn't think it was worth over $100 million. It's just, it's all this glitter and the gold appeals to people very much. But he was not a major artist, So why do people think more highly of Klimt than they think of an American painter like Guston, who I think one of the greatest painters that we've had in this country. And now, Guston is probably high price, but he's a much better artist than Klimt. So I don't put him down like your professor, but he was not the most important artist because of all the money that he gets for his work.
Perhaps like Bomberg, he's more important as a teacher.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, is it possible, though, you talked earlier about the need for spiritual qualities in art, and I think there is a spiritual quality in some of Klimt's art, and is it that yearning for some sort of spirituality that we have today that draws them to Klimt now, possibly?
You think there's much spirituality in Klimt?
I find some. Yeah.
You find, yeah. Well, I can see that.
In his landscapes.
Yeah, they are very beautiful landscapes, and I think he's some of the nude drawings of nudes. I don't know how spiritual they are, but they're beautiful drawings. Very, very beautiful drawings.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the silence show? I saw that at the Manil, and I know a couple of other people who saw it, and I was puzzled by it. I mean, there was, the neon lights, and then there was the room with the recordings playing some familiar, speeches and sounds.
Coming out of a box.
Well, the neon lights, of course, they were Bruce Nauman, just silence, so
Right,
naturally.
right.
The neon lights, it's silence. And Bruce Nauman, is a major American artist. But, in Berkeley, we have the white painted by by Rauschenberg, next to a beautiful black painting by Ed Reinhardt, which I got. And the Ed Reinhardt painting, it's a square painting, and when you first look at it, it's all black. And again, it takes more time to look. And as you look at it more closely, you see that it's cut in a quarter, and there's basically a crucifix in the center. And but you can only get to that point of when you look through silence, through really looking and getting absorbed. And then the end you did, I think the best thing that Andy Warhol ever did were a series of paintings like the electric chairs. And you have two of these electric chairs paintings. And one of them has the word silence. And I mean, here, I mean, this is, you know, very, very powerful paintings. I mean, here we are. Look at these electric chairs. Look at these instruments of murder by the state of its own people. I mean, this is just, I mean, in Texas, I'm afraid to say there are more executions than anywhere else. Baffles me. How can the state try and kill its own people? It's bad enough when you have terrorists killing people, but the state itself. And so Warhol was very much more. So you see these paintings, these two electric chairs paintings, with the word silence there, and they're deeply moving, I think.
Yeah, I think that part was, really, yeah.
Well, maybe one last question.
One more.
Don't be shy.
Lauren, I think that's your cue.
Yeah.